All right, the light is on, and it's time for another netnarr studio hangout. And I'm here at the University of Regina with my good friend Dr. Alec Courus.
Nice to see you, Alan.
Yeah, I know. and hello to everybody back there at Kane. How's class going tonight?
Class is going really wonderful. We've had some pretty depthful conversations about self-representation, and we also expressed some anxieties about the difference between what maybe some of very young people are doing in developing strategies to circumvent authoritative gaze on who they are and what they want to be online versus, like, so we talked about finstas and things like this, but we also talked about, you know, what we think we're capturing when we take a selfie, etc. So, and we read a bit of Irving Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life in order to establish a kind of language around performative acts of self-representation.
So you guys are all ready to do your selfie on selfies? Or are you still trying to scratch your head and figure what that's about?
They're still, they say they're still figuring it out. In all honesty, that was rolled out right before we took a little break. And so I think it's still sort of digesting.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. And, you know, kind of the same theme that we've done before is asking people like Alec, who I've known and actually knew online long before we got to meet, but just like, you know, compared to like our first exciting forays into the internet when we were both 12. No,
right. Yeah,
but just like, how does the internet in general feel right now for you in terms of like a place?
It's interesting. I did a presentation just a few days ago in Calgary. And it was to younger teachers who are taking up the new affordances of technology, and that they're quite optimistic about it. Especially they're doing coding and a lot of connecting online. And there's a video I showed. It was actually from Peter Mansbridge, and to the non-Canadians, you may not know who that is. He was a kind of a journalist on our CBC, which is our national funded public broadcaster, and he in 1993, and it's a great clip to use as a resource, but it's he's kind of announcing to the world that there's this new thing called the internet where people are, and he didn't even call it the internet, he just called internet, and it sounds odd with the way that he expresses it, and he was talking about how people are trading cooking tips and talking philosophy and that sort of thing. And that was a bit of that utopian original vision that people could share research and so on. It was originally a research network. But over time, you know, people found each other online, found friendships, whether it was using IRC. I was a big fan of IRC or MSN Messenger or ICQ. And of course, everything that came beyond there was that really to develop of friendships over time. Now it seems, you know, it's obviously beyond the algorithms and the fake news and all of the other stuff that you may see out there that ends up you end up with a very toxic environment. There's all the stuff that you and I are experiencing around catfishing, for instance, our own photos being used.
You might have to give them the full explanation.
Yeah, I might have to go back. So
we definitely want to hear that story.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about catfishing in particular, and then I'd like to get into, you know, some other stuff that's really related to this idea of identity online. But for about the last, for the time that I know, at least 12 years, and most of you probably in the class know what catfishing is because it's been popularized there's a documentary and series and so on. But basically, this idea that people can use someone else's photos to represent you as someone else. And so for the last 12 years or so, I remember it was 2007 that I discovered it for sure, that someone was using my photos when I got an angry call from someone who thought I was in a relationship with them. And over time, like I get 2 or 3 victims every day telling me that they thought they were in a relationship with me, or that they found out that they're not actually talking to me online. So I'm not one of the catfishers, but I'm one whose identity is catfished, and that comes from having a lot of photos out there and scammers deciding to take these photos and take the ones that they want to use to tell a particular story about me. So the self in this particular instance is the self they create. So it's no longer a self that belongs to me anymore. It's a represented self that basically is an enduring person, someone who might have a good career, who is a loving father of his children, and it's easy to present that particular self to potential victims. And in this case, it's often middle-aged women who are often divorced or widowed, who don't have a lot of internet literacy, who are looking for love for whatever reasons, and they create this connection for them. And over time, and lots of time, some of the scammers will spend months and months talking to these victims. Over time, they enter into these really trusting relationships, and the end goal is to get that person's money. And sometimes it's only $1,000, sometimes it's millions of dollars. And so that's been a big thing that I've been dealing with, and Alan's been dealing with that in his own right. So we've both had these issues over time. So it makes you a bit sour on some of the really nice things that we've seen in some cases, or at least does for me. Alan's more of an optimist than I am sometimes.
Well, and I don't get the volume that you do. But again, the whole idea is they build up this fake persona, and they just they gushingly give people attention who probably are not getting attention. Yeah. And they just slowly work their way, and these people become real to them. The ones who've used my picture nearly always like working on an overseas transport ship, or they're with oil companies,
military,
and from some of the tactics, basically they build up this connection, and then at some point there's a small ask. That's the test. Like, can you send me $200 and I can get a new laptop so we can talk more? And then if the victim gives them the small ask, they come back with the big one. And it's like, I'm in the hospital. I need help getting, plane tickets so I can come to see you. And all this is an organized. I mean, you've had some experience, kind of trying to find out where these operations.
Yeah. So typically they're not just a single, person. It's often it's organized crime. Absolutely. Where there's, it's almost like call centers in some cases, where people are constantly talking to people working on these scams. They might trade off where one person talks to the same person, so you don't even know who you're talking to. But then it gets more intricate. So, for instance, a fake Facebook page of mine might be connected to a fake Facebook page of my daughter's. So they use photos of my daughters, photos of my mother. They use really intimate photos, like there's one photo of my mom mourning over my real dad's grave. So they use photos like that, and then they connect them. And then the scammers will employ people who will actually talk over the phone to these victims, develop all sorts of trust. They're talking on the phone, they're talking to who they think is the daughter, the brother, or whoever it might be. And so you feel like you're part of the family, even though you're living at a distance. So really the end game is, and if you look at the Wikipedia entry on catfishing, they're called trust schemes, right? And that's, so it's all about developing trust and then being able to leverage that trust for something down the road. And there's so many problems. In terms of enforcing these, there's jurisdictional problems, because these things often happen in countries that are beyond the jurisdiction of where the crime happens, as well as there's even this misunderstanding of like why perhaps it's not a crime. So if you were in a relationship, just a regular old relationship, and the person who's your partner promises you a bunch of stuff, at what point is that fraud? So often police treat this as something it's not really crime. You willingly gave up your money for love, and in some cases it can't even be called a crime. And when it comes to identity theft, could be identity theft, but you're not really stealing my identity, you're stealing my pictures to create a whole different identity, and so it becomes vague in that area. So it's really hard to nail down or pin down the crime.
and that's why I don't. I mean, it's not my identity that's being stolen.
Yeah.
And actually, the pictures they're using, they're a lot from my Flickr account, which I do give away.
Yeah.
So I don't really feel like anything is being taken from me, except with the occasional time when someone really comes at you like you're the perpetrator.
Right.
And I've had a couple of those threatening calls. I guess the one thing that gives me confidence is it seems like, at least when people contact you, they become savvy and they've met these people, they've seen the pictures, and they do a reverse Google image search.
Yeah.
And that's where their world starts to crack, because this person that they thought was, Tom O'Leary in the Middle East turns out to be this guy, Alan Levine. And I think mostly the victims they're really embarrassed.
Yeah.
And they're ashamed, and they don't want to tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
Did you
I find that a lot.
Did you guys ever have to speak to victims about, like, to verify that there was fraud involved or anything like this? Did you ever have to speak to some of the people who have been victimized?
Oh, they definitely, like, they ask quite often. And then sometimes you don't know if you're talking to a victim. So one time I got and I think you've got something similar. I got like a request from a victim. Like, I really want to know if it's you. So could you please send me a current newspaper and a picture of you? And I'm thinking that would be, this is probably a scammer asking for this so that they could prove it to someone that they're probably being asked for this same proof.
Oh my God. So
what you provide to people. So even the scammers scam people. And I know of examples where someone was scammed, but then someone pretends that they're the police and they scam these people again. Like, it's just, they continue to harass these people until they've taken every penny. Some of these people have, and there's lots of reports of, leading to suicide or, bankruptcy, marriages ending. I've had, people who have often like daughters or even husbands in some cases of people who basically are asking me, like, I know that my wife or sister or brother or aunt or uncle or mother is talking to someone. I think it's you. If you're the real person, could you please talk to them? Because I can't, like, it's breaking apart the family. And that's one of the thing is they try to get you very quickly to break off all, people won't understand our love, and they'll try to like create a rift between you and anyone you might trust. And it often works quite well. So these people will just totally be blind or, oppositional to anyone who tells them that they might be being deceived, I guess.
And I think, sorry. I mean, Alec gave me some good advice when I first started getting it. And one of it is we both have like web pages where we sort of explain what's going on and provide some resources. But you also told me early on is like, listen to them, but don't get involved with their saga. So, I'll respond. If someone really wants to say, is this your picture? I will send them my original. But I've had a couple where it feels like they still have me confused with the person that they think they fell in love with. For
sure. Absolutely. Yeah. That happens a lot. And like just yesterday, I had to tell someone that they tried friending me after I told them, and I don't friend anyone after this because, for instance, my Facebook, I've learned to people who I'm friends with on Facebook, that's where I share my photos. So I'm careful with some of the photos now that more so than I used to be. But then one of these people who've been scammed tries to friend me, and I just simply said, I don't friend anyone who I don't know online. And she said, well, you'll get to know me. And I said, well, I don't know you. And she kept on being quite forceful about, please be my friend. Like, I can be your friend. And it was really around this idea that she thinks that, like, there's a chance that her and I could get together or something, that there's this, that she's had the history with me already, but it's not real. But it's very difficult to distinguish this person that's never met her versus the person that she's been looking at with, photos and that she has a history with and so on. So I think that's a really, it's very sad.
It's so sad.
Very, very human, very incredibly human.
Yeah, exactly. It's sad because it's so vulnerable and human. I have a question about, so both of you guys are guys. Do you think that this happens just as often in reverse order, where a woman's picture is repurposed for fishing for men's attention and money? Or is it more so the vulnerable woman who gets victimized? I'm wondering about statistics and the research on this.
Yeah, so this is just one type of it, of many subtypes. So for instance, I've had because I put my my experience out there, I get a lot of researchers around this contact me, and I get victims from, because I have videos on YouTube that are looked at quite a bit for people getting advice around this. So I'll give you one example of one that's become scam that's become quite popular, especially with young people. So young men, for instance. So I received a comment from someone I actually knew on Facebook and saying for her son, who just became a teacher. So we got a 22-year-old kid from Australia. I won't say kid, young adult from Australia, who's just become a teacher. And he believes that he was talking to this, Russian, good-looking Russian woman on the internet. And so this interaction between this young, just turned teacher man and this girl was basically that they were talking a lot online. They became intimate. I have reason to believe that this person wasn't just videos; it was actually a real person, probably a paid actor, like a actress. And someone who basically asked this guy to engage in some sort of online intimacy. And then from that point, this person recorded the young man doing this. And then you instantly heard that this was a scammer. So the extortion came out right away. So you see a lot of that. There's a lot in the literature as well of basically blackmailing people after they've committed indecent acts, or whatever you want to call intimate acts. I won't say indecent. Intimate acts online. Intimate acts online, and then they basically extort them. In this case, he didn't know what to do, so he gave them $1,000, and they wanted more. And ultimately, they said that what they were going to do was send it to his headmaster, like sort of like a principal, to his family, to everyone else. So everyone in his family would see this, but at some point you can't continue paying these people. And so he never did send the photos to everyone, but he had to retreat from his own real identity, like his real Facebook page, and they took it over. Basically, he's not online anymore, and they've taken over his page.
Wow.
And so it's almost like you have to like let go of your identity because someone's taking it over, because you can't afford to, it's a really sad thing. And there was if anyone watches Black Mirror, it's kind of an episode that was similar to that sort of notion. But it does tend to happen quite a bit that you see extortion through because of intimate acts.
But I think with the catfishing, I've not seen the stats, but most of the time. But I have heard cases where there have been female characters created. I remember reading one time that the ideal victim is someone who believes in romantic love, like being destined to meet.
Right.
So that's kind of an interesting, and I think they have to be really good at monitoring social media to look for people who are expressing being alone or just ending a relationship or having lost someone as someone potential victim. They are phishing.
Yeah. Well, if you think of the tools that Facebook gives you, if you're looking for a particular demographic, you have it, right? So for instance, they do this in even, we'll say anti-vax in that area. So for instance, if you're looking for the term in Facebook advertising is interested in pregnancy. So if you're interested in pregnancy, then someone who might have a particular something to sell you, like anti-vax information, might basically target advertisements to those interested in pregnancy. So if you use some of those analytics as well as search terms, so if you're looking for anyone who's widowed or divorced in a particular age range. You can find that from analytics through Facebook advertising. But you could also, like, for instance, if you look at the most popular names of women in the say 1950, you type in Doris or something like that and widowed, and you would get a list of people on Facebook named that who probably are widowed. And so you already have, if you have an assumption around your demographic and what they like, and maybe that generation is more interested in romantic love than hookup culture, for instance. And so it becomes a very different thing in terms of, connection. They may not be as net literate as people. They may, and so it's really interesting how it's very simple using the analytics that we have through advertising or just good search methodologies that you can actually find your victims easier. One scammer who told me, I often enter into conversations with scammers, say they look for hyper-religious people, for instance. And so,
wow.
And so when you think of hyper-religious or ultra-religious, they may be less inclined to, say, scientific literacy, which is just a different way of knowing, and just something that I thought was kind of interesting, that some people, depending on what lines you're giving them, would tend to believe something, or would tend to believe something at face value versus tend to believe something with some research behind it.
Right.
I think an interesting twist, and you've probably seen this, is the number of people who are now attracting victims through words with friends.
Right. Yeah.
So the last 3 contacts I've had is they meet someone, they play a game of Scrabble, they start conversing a lot, and then they try to get them to go to some other medium where they can converse.
Yeah. And then you have to,
Words with Friends, a game that's online?
It's a mobile phone app for playing like Scrabble between 2 people.
Got it. Okay.
but you've instantly got a bit of a demographic with, if you're playing Scrabble online. I mean, there are young people that play it, but there's tend to be other people, and then over time, you end up like developing trust through that. I mean, because you play 100 games, and I mean, I've seen really beautiful stories where there's young people who play with older people and develop a relationship over that, like a friendly relationship that's a legit relationship through, like, we spend enough time on the platform, you're going to develop feelings, whether it's romantic feelings or just friendship. This happens over time, and that's one of the beautiful things about the internet. But of course, it can be incredibly exploited.
Yeah, I have a question about how would we take steps to try to prevent this kind of twisted reuse of our content shared online? Any take steps?
Well, lots of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because most of the options lead to this idea that we lose our freedom because something is happening. We have to decide that we can only share certain things out there, and so I think that's the first caveat is once we decide to do something less of that we feel inclined of normally, we become less free, and I think that's something that we have to be thoughtful about. But I mean, I think things that are reasonable. Just in terms of, say, in my case, if I'm a parent, I'm much less likely to share something of my kids to groups that are not private in some sense. So I'm very careful when I share things on Facebook that when I share things of my kids, they're typically private. So that would be one part of that. Also, the types of things that we share. Because we live, and this is part of the Goffman article, I think, this idea, or the chapter, when we start to think about, like, we perform certain things. I perform, I mean, this is subconsciously, but I can perform online, the academic, the caring father, there are certain things that we perform. And so the photos that come from us aren't just bland photos or headshots. They are typically things that are endearing, that other people like. When we get likes on Instagram, it's usually, if I can think of the likes that I have, it's usually me cuddling my kid or something like that. I have to think differently about how my performance can be leveraged by someone else performing that in another story. So someone else can steal my story. So I guess the more bland of a photo you take, if it's more of a headshot, it's less likely to be exploited. But do we want to live in a world where we can't share our moments like that? So I think that's an important piece. So if we don't want to be exploited, I mean, we can just stop participating. If we stop participating, is that the culture we want to live in? So I think that's, I mean, we can do things around privacy and choice. And some people will do that. But on the flip side of that, there are a lot of people I come to that are incredibly private. They lock everything up, and then they make one mistake online where they're on their Facebook account and they let in one catfisher because they thought it was a real account, but it was actually a phishing account or a catfishing account. That person can take every one of your private photos, and those photos become more lucrative because they're not typically
in circulation.
Google reverse image because they're not on the public web.
Yeah.
So so even the most private people, if they make one little mess up online, those photos are used without their notice.
So in a way, you're public about some things. In a way, it's almost like insurance that there's a verification process that's accessible to everyone.
You're right. So it's a trade-off. It's like, when I'm public about this and I public with my photos, it's more likely to come back to me and to know about it. So many people say, well, why does this happen to you? And I said, how do you know it doesn't happen to you? Like it's sort of, it may be happening to you, you just don't know it.
Yeah, that's what I'm freaking out about right now.
Right.
I mean, it's not laughable. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You kind of get used to it, but I think until we get into the point where you insert, we have hashes on our photos and that they can't be used. Like Facebook tried to fix this. The latest stats from Facebook, they believe that about half of the profiles on Facebook are probably fake. Like half, one of two people. And then Facebook had this harebrained idea. I thought it was the most ridiculous idea that was probably created by some junior staffer, but basically, they had this idea that say in the cases of like the sharing of intimate images, like otherwise known as sexting. So what if one of your photos ends up out there? Facebook was saying, send us your intimate photos, like through they had a messenger account set up. Send us your photos, we'll hash them, which basically means that they sort of inventory them. And so if they ever show up on Facebook, they won't show up.
Holy!
Like, can you imagine the guy in that inbox?
Like, we'll take care of that for you.
Yeah, we'll take care of that.
Trust us.
Like, are you sure that's not a scam in itself? Like,
it shows how confident they are that their like authorized signature is more important than anything else. You know, like that Facebook, the corporation, is God. Yeah, exactly.
But that's exactly it. If you look at Google, Twitter, Facebook, like the more we authenticate our identity, like this is never going to be, our identity is so much, it's going to be controlled very much by these companies. There's no government, whether it's US, Canadian, whatever out there, is going to basically identify us in the future. Our passports are going to be a thing of the past, right? We're going to probably at some point, just by right of money and power doesn't belong as much to governments anymore as it does to these multi-million, multi-billion, multi-trillion conglomerates. And so they're fighting over this idea of who gets to say whose identity, like who verifies who. And so in the future, what's going to be more powerful, your passport or your blue check mark by Twitter? And I think that's where the future is headed, that this is a game because of, and not because of the documentation, because of the difficulty of assessing someone's photo, given all of the different types of, image recognition and facial recognition technologies down there. It's going to be very easy for a company like that to basically take over the identity portfolio versus governments. And at some point, it's probably going to be governments entering into agreements with big companies to do their identity verification for them. And this is kind of a scary future to think about that.
Yeah.
How can it be exploited, right?
Yeah.
I might add like if you had known this like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
would your behavior like if you had some pre-recognition of this? It's a ridiculous question.
Yeah.
But
actually, it's a good question, Alan, because so much of our career is also, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I think you guys are included in this. So much of our, the joy of our learning comes from the networks that we've developed, you know, as individuals and together collectively. And I have to say myself that in many ways, my networks online have helped me survive, like times in which I might have felt isolated in my own institution, or times in which I just felt a little like lack of dynamism intellectually in the conversations I might be having. And then I discovered so many colleagues and resources and developed new interests, all based on networked contexts. So in a way, the risk that you're asking, would you take it 10 years ago if you knew where it was going? I see a lot of benefits that I've gained from these experiences, as much as I have taken risk. And now I'm worried about like who thinks they're talking to me because of some picture I left on the internet. I worry about that, but
the question?
Oh, no, the question, so back to the question, and I think you can go, it could be thrown back to you or Alec. The question was, you know, now that you know how the direction all of this has gone in the last decade, would you have sort of emerged online in the forms of sharing that you chose in a similar pathway, or would you have changed certain things?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question in two ways, and then I'll take us on a twist. All right.
And I just want to also say that we end class in about 10 minutes or so. So just
I'll take us on a quick twist though. But so yes, I would have continued to do what I did today about my own identity. The same things that, you know, the same principles around this that it can be leveraged. The photos I shared, the videos I shared, the tweets I shared brought me to you, brought me to Alan, brought me to everyone that I care about in the network, who have become my friends and so on. So had it not been about that particular way that I shared, I may not be known to many of you, and I may not know you, and that's important to me. With my kids, I would have been more selective with my own children. I think that's something that a lot of parents think about, because I don't think I get as much right to tell my kid. You know, it's in some ways, you know, we share, and perhaps we shouldn't share in the ways that we do with our kids. I mean, the term is sharenting these days, and I think we have to be thoughtful about what we share, because perhaps we have less right to do this with our I'm hearing echo with our kids, I guess, in some way. So I think I have less right to do what I've done in terms of share my kids, you know, photos. And I think I wish I had less to do with their identity and maybe help them shape their identities more in the future. And I think that's something, just a thought. I would have done things differently, not necessarily stopped altogether, but done things differently. And then in a bit of a twist, when I think of the kids in particular, there's been recent controversies. For instance, like I remember like 15 years ago, I wrote a post around how it wasn't 15, it was about 10 years ago, when I shared photos of my daughter. She was like in gymnastics, for instance, and there was photos I put out there, and I put those online, and they're cute little girl photos, but then I ended up seeing them in Flickr albums of all of these other photos of kids in leotards and that sort of thing. And then for the first moment, I realized that someone else is seeing my kids' photos in a way that I don't want them to be seen, that she doesn't want them to see. She doesn't deserve to have them seen that way. And then if you just heard the recent controversy in the last few weeks around, there's been some prominent vloggers. Wubby is one of the guys on YouTube that sort of kind of broke this scandal that basically, if you go and you start a brand new YouTube account and you type in words like gymnastics, what you're served with is video after video after video of what almost seems like an exploitative set of videos, or an algorithm that leads you to photos that to videos that seem to just exploit children, like stolen videos. And so Facebook has actually taken away, well, not Facebook, YouTube has taken away some of the advertisement, the revenue that they get, the monetized videos, just because it looked like there was lots of exploitation happening even on YouTube that was sort of blind, that we didn't get to see because we weren't looking for those videos, and we didn't get those recommended videos. But if you come into YouTube in certain ways and get into a certain playlist, there was a lot of probably child predators that were using these videos in different ways. So that's the really crazy reality. And one more twist before I know class is almost done. And this is, I mean, taken to a different place as well. One of the scary things, I think, is to think that some of the victims of these catfishing scams, like I often have said, and Alan's run into this as well, that like some of the victims have said, it must be you because I actually talked to you online, and what do you mean talk to you online? I actually had video chat with you. And so that was a big realization, that I realized that people were actually using my videos to, like I could put a video over Google Hangouts if I wanted to, I think. Google Hangouts, because I can change the camera to a tool called Minicam, and I can play a video over this platform. And you don't actually know if this is actually a real video or if this is just a video that's been pre-recorded, if this is actually live. And there's new technologies out there. One notable one that emerged in Reddit the last little while was something called deepfakes, which had been used to basically take a celebrity's photos and then superimpose them on like adult videos, for instance. So there's all these other things that down the road, and there's been some more scientific and university-led initiatives like this, down the road, we're going to have a very difficult time in understanding what's real and what's fake. And that's been a tenet for humans for the last millennia, is right, that seeing is believing. I mean, we've been very reliant on our sensory experiences, and seeing being one of those most prominent ones. Down the road, the technology is getting so great. Like we've got those technologies, got Adobe Voco, which could basically copy the imprint of your voice. We won't know what's true and what's fake. And it's, besides being creepy from the dating scene, this is like a national security threat. Like this is a huge thing. Wait until, some prominent authority decides that we're going to war with someone, right? Or whatever it might be, some fake video. And this has been identified in a number of different ways at national security letters as a huge national threat. So catfishing at the lowest level, this, interrupts our lives, but this is something that's even at a bigger idea, because again, from the very beginning, this all comes down to performance and it comes down to trust.
Right. Those are the two.
I'm getting off.
Yeah, get off the internet. Burn the Twitters.
Yeah. So like we started with the darkness on the internet, and obviously we're ending with a strong kind of cautionary perspective on where things are going. Any last comments, or what, you guys? Do you have any last questions about any of this? So I can interpret a little bit like the faces in the room, because you might not be able to see very clearly, but everybody seems somewhat overwhelmed, and there's a lot of shaking heads and deep concern in people's the way they appear right now. And I'm the same way. I feel what can we do as citizens? What can we do as communities to prevent any of this? And it feels a little bit like, Well,
if you want pure prevention, you don't put your pictures on the internet.
Yeah.
That may not be, that may be the thing you want to do. But you can't control the distribution of images.
Yeah.
And you can't count on the Facebooks, the Googles, the Twitters, the Amazons to really protect it. And so, I mean, my action is like, I want in places I control to be able to assert my identity. So when people find me, it's pretty clear that it's me.
That was actually one silver lining for me, is that if you have a digital trace, then you can you can prove that there was consistency of contribution, and that this is the real version of you if there's alternative versions.
I think that's a huge part of it. And like, even with Alan's idea, like, don't put your photos on the internet, but there was a recent, teenager that was gone missing in a small town, Saskatchewan. And there was actually videos released of her in her last day of disappearance, but there was video of her at the school, video of her at the Tim Hortons, coffee shop, everywhere she went, like, in a single day. And I realized, like, how much video of each one of us exists every single day, and that we don't even know, like, whether it's our photo radar, or, like, there are agencies that know everywhere we go. By, if you're in China, you've got facial recognition everywhere you go. They have that instituted in the UK. So it's not even a matter of us putting our photos on the internet. Right?
You can't hide. Yeah. No, like, wherever you go, it's registered in all kinds of systems. You're right.
So it's more like, do we have the ability, like we're big fans of Reclaim hosting and things like own your own identity. But I would much rather down the road not have Facebook or Twitter tell me who I am. It's having my own space on the internet, and hopefully there'll be search engines that reach those spaces in the future if net neutrality holds together. That we have to basically say that, like, to be able to have some sort of trust network that says, Alan Levine, this is the best way I know who Alan is, and there's got to be some sort of shared circumstances that we don't have. That we have individual control over our own identities, and that's something that's going to have to happen. Otherwise, I mean, there are some dire consequences coming up. But I think there is hope. I think there just needs to be much more awareness before we can have more hope, though.
Correct. I agree with that. The awareness, and I think that this class and these recordings, Alan, are contributing to, in a small fashion, to broader, bringing awareness to others. So I feel good about that work, that part of our work.
I think that's the only viable way is people find ways to know more, to be critical. And the thing I suggest, which I can't really convince people to do, I suggest the strategy of, like, playing out the catfish frauders. And it comes from this video, this James Vitch, who did this thing with a spam emailer, and he basically engaged this guy in a long time. And his strategy was, the longer I occupy the scammer's time, me playing him, the less time he's playing other people. And I think it's kind of idealized. I think it's a beautiful strategy. And there's a thing called scam bait. And that's what it's all about, is scamming scammers. I'm just imagining the amount of time that'll take. But there's probably some form of empowerment in.
Well, there are more of us than them, so.
Yes. Anyway, Alec, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and for sharing your experiences and also sharing your strategies. And as always, I learn from you. So. And
this is the real Alec Courus.
Yeah, it is.
I'm reassured. I actually.
But who are you? Do I know who you are?
I'm the real. I don't know. But what I was going to say is, I'm reassured. I mean, I'm going to take away the things you said about our children as well, because I've been thinking about that as well, and I have shared pictures, no gymnastics videos, but I've shared pictures, and now I wonder. So anyway, thank you.
Nice to meet you, class. I hope it was not too scary, but all right.
Thanks a lot. I'm gonna stop the broadcast, and have a great week, and we'll see you next week, netnarr.
Ciao.